Okay, so what is the main lesson that I've learned? So the main lesson that I've learned is that doing public policy is very difficult. It's because when you are mastering public resources, and your objective is to put the state at the service of the population, of the general good. That means you have to take these resources and put them at the service of the population at large. But in order to do that, probably you have to fight a lot of interest groups which are somehow taking advantage of the state. And really what you do is very opaque. It's very difficult to monitor what you do in government. It's very difficult to follow, to assess if you're using the resources properly or not properly. So the main relevant thing is that you have to have the right values to actually push in the direction of putting the government at the service of the public good, because permanently you're going to be kind of pushed from all these different groups which want you to transform what's public and private. And you're doing this in a context where nobody's seeing you, nobody's watching you, because it's very difficult to monitor the state. So if you don't have if your values are not right, you're going to be pushed into something that is not what the state is and the government is intended to. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. For example, corruption is the main example. Corruption is something that happens which makes what's public into private. Private of whoever in the private sector is participating in that corruption, or private from the government officials which participate in that corruption. So there we see very clearly. But the main example that I want you to give, which is an example which doesn't involve money, so I think it's easier to see it, is that one of the main conflicts that we had that I had as president of Banco Ciudad is that when I went into the Banco Ciudad, the people Banco Ciudad was a place which is very peculiar within the public sector, because the workers are bank employees. So they have a relatively high wage. They're public employees, but they are paid a relatively high wage. So who used to go to work to Banco Ciudad? Well, who used to go to work to Banco Ciudad was either the people who the politicians said, we want these people to work here. So it was political militants, people on which you had to pay back some kind of favor, and then you got them a job, people who had worked in the campaign, not that they were interested in banking or anything, but they were interested in having a job, particularly if it's a job where you can't fire them from, okay? So for many years, the people who came to work into this organization were these appointees, these political appointees by the political system, or the sons and daughters of the current employees. So this is also a way of transforming something that's public into private. Private of specific groups which somehow have a privilege in access resources from the state. So I told the mayor that this is a very minor example, but I think it's very symbolic, and I'm going to tell you a very funny story in a minute. It's I said, this is not the way the state works. The state has to work to provide equal opportunities, not to basically slot in these resources into these privileged groups. So the mayor said, fine, we're never from the political side, you're never going to be asked to get anybody into the bank from the political side. You deal with the guys at the bank. And so we decided to implement a system where the access was going to be fully meritocratic. So we kind of published in the main newspapers that these were those openings. We typically had 20,000, 30,000 candidates. We selected according to their average, their GPA scores in the high school or in their universities, depending on the category. Then we selected the best 1,000 scores. They had to take an exam, and then we were left with, say, 100, 200, and then we gave privilege among those 200 to kids who were coming from the public educational system. So that was our system. So system totally geared to provide equal opportunity with a little bit notch of affirmative action there at the end. Well, I had 25 strikes. 25 strikes, I say, against equal opportunity. So I would call the union leader, which was an extreme left wing, and he says, you have to give me a quota for the workers here. And I say, I don't know if you realize that the workers here are all in the 10% richest of the population of Argentina because they're bank employees with high wages, etc. So I thought you were from the left wing, and you're asking me for a quota for the rich. If you would have come and asked me, for example, for a quota from the guys from the best school GPAs from the shanty towns, I'm with you. But how can I going to accept that you come and ask me for a privilege for the rich? I mean, you thought that I was a kind of a center-right guy, and I'm Lenin compared with you. I'm Lenin. So the guys were completely kind of caught completely off balance. It was very funny because at the end they said, what am I going to do with this guy? How we're going to, because politically, internally in the bank, this was a very important issue. So they made me a 5-day strike, no? And when the strike ends, you know, having a bank closed for 5 days is pretty tough. So when the strike ends, I called the guy and said, Pepe, I'm going to ask you not to strike, to stop this strike. And he says, finally, you've heard. I said, yeah, I've heard the guys with the drums all week long. I mean, I have my head is exploding from the noise. But heard what? No, you're going to, okay, you're going to concede, and you're going to give this. No, this is a question of principle. I'm not going to concede anything. No, I'm asking you not to do a strike, to stop this strike, because I'm going to not pay the wages of the workers who go on strike. Because the Constitution is very clear. You have the right to strike, but the employer doesn't have the obligation to pay when you decide to use your right to strike. So I'm not going to, but don't worry, I don't want the money. You know, I'm not going to keep the money. That I'm not going to pay to the workers, I'm not going to keep the money. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to give it back, because this money is not yours, it's not mine, it's not of the mayor, it's of the people of the city of Buenos Aires. So we're going to return the money to the people of the city of Buenos Aires. And the guy was looking at me like saying, this guy has gone completely mad. He says, so I'm going to do is, I'm going to take this money and I'm going to buy X-ray equipments for the public hospitals in the city of Buenos Aires. But don't worry, I'm going to put a donation of employees of Banco Ciudad. Okay. Well, there was never again a strike. There was never again a strike at the bank. But nobody knew about this. Nobody knew. So you fight to provide equal opportunities. It's a benefit which is very diluted. The person you're benefiting doesn't even know what that person perhaps one day reads an ad in the newspaper, goes to apply for a job and gets the job because there wasn't someone privileged which basically was appointed before him, but they're not going to be there defending you. But at the same time, you have to be fighting with those interest groups, with the strikes which are trying to appropriate something from the state to privilege them. Is the idea clear? It's so extreme that once I got, and I finished with the story, I got 70 guys into the call center out of this process, and 3 months later they have the strike to have the sons and daughters come back in, and 20 guys out of the 70 go on strike. So I get on my car, I go to the call center, I get the 20 guys together, and I do the following thing. I get the chair of one of them, and so I get the chair, and then I throw the chair to where they were. So the guys are completely shocked. So I look at the guy who was the chair and say, look, you see this chair? This chair had a name. This chair had a name. This chair had been slotted to someone, and that someone, was not you. It so happens that it was not you. It was a son of an employee, it was a political appointee, but you're sitting in this seat because you deserve it, because you study, you're able, you went through the exam, you're the best. And I fought so that you are sitting there. Now, if you, who are the guy who benefited from my effort to provide equal opportunities, once you're in the system, are fighting to, so that I turn back and have a system of privilege, well, you see what the difficulty is. So the guys, they were all kind of completely shocked. And then the guy says, one guy says, look, I think you're right. Let's do the following. My cousin gets in, and then we stop, okay? But I'm giving you the stories, and I'm spending a little bit of time with this because you're very much alone. You have to fight the interest groups, and you're alone. There's no one who's going to be defending, but the guys who are going to be affected by you taking the state and putting it to the service of the population, those are going to fight. And this is an idea that as people studying here, you may have heard about. There's a very famous economist called Mancur Olson, and he wrote a book in the 1960s called The Logic of Collective Action, and he describes exactly this process, the process of the fight between concentrated interest groups and the public good. And he basically said there's no chance. There's no chance that the public good wins, because when I had those 5 days of strike, I would get home completely exhausted, tired, the level of tension that you lived in the organization. And my wife says, Federico, is this worth it? Why are you doing this? Nobody knows. Nobody cares. And I said, no, I'm doing this because this is in what I believe. And this is the reason I came here, to change things, so that things work in a different way. So that's my lesson. That's my difficulty. You're going to find this all over in whatever thing you do in public policy. You're going to be fighting alone to defend the public good, and you're going to be fighting a lot of people who are vocal, who are aggressive, because typically money is involved, and you're taking away from them those money because you want to put it at the service of the state. So that's kind of my main lesson. So that's my first point about the difficulties. The second is, what do you need to do? So we had lots of criticisms and we went away. But the main example I want to give you about courage has to do with education. So when the current Minister of Education is appointed in the city of Buenos Aires, the mayor says, give me your analysis, your diagnosis of the system of the public educational system in the city of Buenos Aires. And then the minister says, yes, the problem is that it's privatized. And the mayor says, no, I know that half of the kids in the city of Buenos Aires go to private schools, but I'm asking you about the public educational system. So the minister looks at him and says, yes, the problem is that it's privatized. And the mayor says, no, you're not understanding me. I know that within the public educational system, we have schools which are financed by the state but are run by local cooperatives, which are kind of privately run, even though state financed. I'm asking you about the public schools. The public schools, the schools that we are paying and that we are running. What do you think is the main problem there? And then the minister says they are privatized. So the guy says, what are you talking about? Certainly there's something I'm missing here. I'm not understanding something. And the minister says, yeah, they're privatized. They're privatized to the unions. What do you mean? Well, when you look at the way the schools are run, there's something called what's called juntas de clasificación, which it's an institution which defines who promotes in the educational system, who becomes a director of a school, who becomes a school inspector, who becomes a teacher with more seniority. And that junta de clasificación is run by the unions. So who do you think the teacher is going to respond to? Is it going to respond to the state, or is it going to respond to the unions? Well, it's obvious. It's going to respond to the unions. So the guys who became the school directors were not the best teachers, but were the most active unionists. So the whole educational system was a permanent political fight, lots of strikes, and people were leaving the public educational system into the private educational system. Because parents care about the education of their kids, and the first thing they want is their kids to have school. So, because what are the values? The values is that the public educational system is a key factor to have a society with equal opportunity, which is more egalitarian, We want a society with a very strong public educational system. So that's the value. So we need to transform that into actions. And the action is, well, this is the diagnosis. This is a particular group of people who have taken over the educational system for their own benefit and not for the benefit of the state. So that's the boldness. And that implied a change in what we call the Estatuto Docente, which is the way, the laws which rule the teachers' union, which had not been changed in 50 years. So that's the boldness. We have to change this. So we decided to pass a law, to propose a law to the city legislature, which reformed these juntas de clasificación. And for 6 months, we basically had the school system taken over by the unions and by the students, mobilized by the unions. So basically had for 6 months no schools in the city of Buenos Aires. And that's where I say you need the courage. You need the courage to say, I'm going to stick because I believe in this, and in spite of the opposition, I'm going to take it to completion. So finally, after 6 months of fight, in December 1, we actually got the law passed. And then the mayor decided to do something else, which was kind of surprising, because he said, similar to what I mentioned before in Banco Ciudad, we're not paying to workers. That's not the main thing we do every day, but in spite of what it seems from this talk, he said, I'm not going to pay the wages of all the workers which were on strike. So all the days that the teachers were on strike, I'm not going to pay the wages because of the same reasoning. I mean, I'm not going to finance the strike of the public educational system with the money of the taxpayers of the city of Buenos Aires. And what happened is that after that, meaning you have your values, you have your ideas, you bring them to completion, there was never again a strike in the public educational system in the city of Buenos Aires. And people today are going back from the private educational system to the public educational system. It's the only place in the Argentine Republic where the public educational system is actually growing, and now it's actually growing faster and faster every year. This year we had a tremendous increase in the amount of people who move from the private educational system to the public educational system. And I think that sometimes you have magic happening, and what happened is that why there weren't any strikes after that? Because teachers, in reality, they don't want to strike. Most of the teachers in the public, the big majority, almost everybody, they are deeply passionate about what they do, and they're deeply committed to the public educational system. But if the strike is free for them, meaning they don't pay any cost, because after striking you get your wage paid, what excuse do they have with the unions to say that they're not going to participate in the strike? They don't have an argument. So when we decided that we were not going to pay the same wage to someone who went on strike than someone that didn't go on strike, they started having an excuse. So they could go to the union and say, look, I'm not going to strike because I need my wage. Perhaps they were not that interested in their wage of that particular day, but they had an argument with which they could defend what they really believed in, and it's that kids in the public school system had to have classes. So we changed dramatically not only the relationship of power between the state and the unions, but between the teachers and the union, in a way that turned out to be tremendously effective and beneficial for the public educational system. But you see the combination. You need the three ingredients. You need the values,